And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. Part 2. Part 1 has been suppressed by the powers that be, and you'll never hear it. I'm Nick Wolfinger.
And I'm Dalton Whitehead.
What are you going to talk about this week, Dalton?
This is an issue that's, since it was created, I feel like has been a topic of debate, but more so, I feel like in the past few years, with Democratic candidates and politicians like Bernie Sanders, minimum wage, living wage, the whole concept of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I've heard very compelling arguments against it that make sense to me, but I'm open to any ideas and data. Maybe if you have some data on it. If you don't, let's discuss either way.
I can tell you the results of some of the studies that have been done and tell you what I think. But what are your arguments against it?
I think it takes jobs away from people. The argument, the main video I would say for people to look up that I've watched that makes sense to me, you just type in Joe Rogan, Peter Schiff, minimum wage on YouTube. And when that comes up, like when I watch that video, how I feel about it or what has made the most sense to me. But I will admit I've never heard a thought out argument for it other than just people deserve it or a very basic argument for it. I haven't heard a whole long discussion from somebody who supports it. So I will admit that I'm very biased and that I haven't heard good counter arguments, like most things I believe in.
I think it's good to be open-minded, and I don't think the evidence is strong in one direction or another. That won't keep me from having an opinion about it in the end. So what's the reason why it would take jobs away from people?
Well, I think most people nowadays are saying $15 minimum wage, which makes sense because, the national minimum wage is, I think, $7.25 right now. Yeah. And I see job postings for fast food workers making $10, $11, $12 an hour all the time. So already the market has raised the wages for people past the minimum wage for the most part. I think I saw In-N-Out post that they start you out at $12 an hour. So when people that argue for the minimum wage, a lot of times in their arguments, they make it out to be that there's just insane amounts of people making $7.25 an hour, and I just don't buy that for the most part. I know they're out there, of course. Right. I've made minimum wage in my life. I've made $7.25 an hour. So, and obviously this was years ago where the value of the dollar's changed, but like when Peter Schiff in that video, he talks about if your labor can't produce a value that is $15 an hour worth, then I can't hire you. So if for every hour you're working, you're costing me money by employing you at a mandated wage, well, then I'm going to find ways to not have that job. And that's like one tiny part of his argument. And you see fast food companies putting in like these, like instead of having cashiers, they just have little like kiosks in their lobby where you just order the food yourself. To me, if you jack up minimum wage, then I think you're going to see more automation and more technology to replace jobs.
We'll see more automation anyhow. There's been a ton of automation. Automation
For sure.
is the primary reason why manufacturing jobs have departed the United States economy. It's not offshoring for the most part. It's automation, and it will continue. It does create some new jobs, and it creates some better jobs. But I'm getting off topic. So keep in mind that the $7.25 an hour is a federal minimum, meaning no one in America can price an hourly wage below $7.25 an hour. There, of course, there are exemptions for contract work. So if you're an independent contractor, like a Lyft or Uber driver, there you're not paid on an hourly rate. Many states have higher minimum wages than the $7.25 an hour, and some cities have higher minimum wages than the surrounding states. And I believe there's even one or two states that have passed laws saying a city can't raise the minimum wage higher than the state minimum wage, which seems very contrary to the spirit of local determination. Anyhow, the states that have higher minimum wages are typically the wealthier states on the coasts, and cities, cities like Seattle, for example, which just passed a $15 an hour minimum wage. So, evidence. Does the minimum wage cost jobs? Well, here's how economists have often tested it. They've looked at two labor markets in different states that are right across the border from one another, like Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. Two labor markets that should be comparable, but one is in a state that's raised its minimum wage and one hasn't. And so that way you get a naturally occurring experiment, because in theory the only thing that differs between the two is a higher minimum wage. And mostly those studies suggest that raising modest increases in the minimum wage do not cost jobs. Now, of course, if you raise the minimum wage to $50 an hour, would it cost jobs? Of course it would. But no one has done that. The number that 600 federal economists have recommended be the new federal minimum wage is $10.10 an hour. I have no doubt that $15 an hour is a fine minimum wage in big cities, but $15 an hour might be too high for some businesses in rural areas to pay. So I don't know if I'd welcome a federal minimum wage that high. However,
Yeah, I definitely, when you say that, I feel like it shouldn't be up to the federal government.
well, the federal government should set a floor, I think. I mean, they have already. And that floor, that $7.25 an hour, has not kept up with inflation. Adjusted for inflation, I don't think it's changed. It's been decades since the minimum wage has increased. So it really hasn't kept the federal minimum wage.
Yeah. But most people aren't making that. They're making more.
That's true. That's true.
So to me, it's almost like irrelevant. And almost. And there is some people making it, but to me, it's like, well, and I know I live closer to a city, so it might be different in smaller towns, but I'm seeing fast food workers making $3, $4, $5 an hour more than that.
Yeah.
So what's lower than a fast food worker as far as pay scale?
But we're not talking about Salt Lake City, because Salt Lake City has done well. It's a city. The economy's done well. We're talking about the more depressed parts of the country here. And that's where...
Well, if they're more depressed, then how could the businesses there keep up with a higher minimum wage?
Because, just because the average wages are lower and most people are lower doesn't mean everyone's poor.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is, like, if there's less income coming in those areas...
Yeah. No, that's a reasonable question, and that's why a federal increase to $15 an hour strikes me as too high.
See, I think it should just be left up to the states.
Less up to the states?
People impacted by the minimum wage have more of a say. Maybe business, so there's large amount of business owners that say, hey, if you raise this, there's no way I can keep up. And so if it's more localized, they have more of a say versus a federal.
So you don't think there should be any federal minimum wage at all?
No, it doesn't make sense to me. I think it should just be state by state and maybe even, break it down county by county.
Well, that's certainly too difficult to implement.
Why?
So each county is going to conduct detailed studies of the economic needs and the people's ability to pay wages.
No, they don't have to do that. Maybe they just follow suit with what the state wants, but maybe they at least have
Yeah.
maybe they at least have the power to change it.
I feel very strongly that if you want to pay your workers lower than 7.25 an hour, you have no business running a company in America. I think
Well, I think that's a terrible business plan. I mean, who's gonna work hard and go the extra mile or even stick around if you're paying your workers low wages? They'll just leave for jobs that pay higher. So I think businesses have an incentive to pay their employees as much as possible because it's so much harder to constantly keep training employees if employees are constantly leaving for something better.
You are
Especially companies that are competing in an industry. The company I'm with is a non-union company. They are throughout the years have had to raise their wages because union companies have a certain wage, or even within union companies, there's competition for perks or wages and stuff like that where companies are constantly, they're basically bidding for their labor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's a good point. Unions not only raise the wages for their members, but they raise wages for non-unionized businesses because they have to compete. But a lot of what you're saying assumes a properly functioning labor market. It assumes a full information labor market, and it assumes a labor market that's devoid of monopolies. And you've heard the expression "one company town."
I think so, like
Yeah.
a small town
Yeah, where there's a
that
limited
basically,
number of employers.
yeah.
And so in that case, having market pressures to raise wages doesn't really work well.
But if the wages are too low, what's stopping people from moving? Or what if that one company town, what if that company goes out of business? What would those people do?
So one company town doesn't literally mean one company. It just means a limited number of employers in a company, in a town.
Yeah,
And
but if it's significant, if let's say that business went out of business, would people just starve in that town
in
and
some
die?
cases, they would exit the labor force because they might have family roots, family or other roots there that would act as a barrier to moving. You raise a good issue that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there was much more internal mobility in the United States. People moved more from state to state in search of good jobs. In particular, the Great Migration, where African Americans moved out of the South and into the industrial Midwest. But there's less migration now than there used to be. And I'm not sure why.
Do you think it's just because it's not as necessary? I mean, I feel like if you're going to move across the country or different states away from your family, it's because you need to.
Right. Well, I don't know. That's a good question.
That's what I would assume.
I don't know. I honestly don't know and don't feel qualified to speculate without doing some more research on that. I do know that it is something that has captured public attention, and people have speculated on. But it's easy to say, "Hey, go move." It's harder to actually do it. Anyhow, getting back to the question about minimum wages, yes, it's not having a minimum wage is not there to protect the average worker or the majority of workers. It's there to protect the workers on the margins.
Okay.
And so that's, I think,
Um,
why the law exists in the first place.
uh, One thing in that Peter Schiff video, he talked about like he said, he's like, I tend to think like people are rational. He's like, so he's like, if you're getting paid $5 an hour, he's like, I would hope that you would be rational enough. This is like paraphrasing, but you'd be rational enough to try and find a job that pays more. And if you literally can't find a job that pays more, then you should be thankful that it's better to be employed at $5 an hour than not employed at $15 an hour.
That may not be true, right? I think there are many cases in which it would be preferable to not be employed at $5 an hour.
So making zero money?
Sure, you don't have to put up with a shit job. If you have a spouse who's working, who can support you, it may not be worth working. Well, let me ask this about Peter Schiff. He's a stockbroker and financial commentator. I'd sooner take the opinion of a professional economist on the subject, someone who actually studies this. I think it's an idealized argument that the labor market will always produce competitive wages. It assumes a functioning labor market. It assumes full information workers. It implies a lack of monopolies. And that's just not the world we live in. There's increasing monopoly power. Just, I think, more monopoly power in the United States by conventional measures than there's been in many years. And if you don't believe me, try doing a non-Google search. You can do it, but you'll have to work a little bit for it. Anyhow, but that's obviously another example at the higher end margins.
Do you feel like the minimum wage laws benefit bigger businesses than smaller businesses? Like to me, it like the big corporations can pay a little bit more on their labor just because they're so big, and it kind of kicks the smaller businesses out.
I don't know. I don't know how large business and small business wages compare. I just don't know. I'm not prepared to say any more until I know. So let me say, I think what my ideal is. I said a minute ago that economists think the minimum wage should be raised to just over $10 an hour, that the $15 an hour that many activists want would force some employers to go out of business in some poorer areas. What I'd like is a combination of a slightly higher federal minimum wage coupled with a greatly strengthened earned income tax credit program. You familiar with the earned income tax credit?
No.
Ronald Reagan called it America's greatest anti-poverty program. And it's been a tax credit made available for several decades and enlarged and generally supported by both parties. It basically says that if you are a low-wage earner, you get money back at the end of the year. So it's a federal subsidy to low-wage workers.
Why not just not tax them to begin with and just cut to the chase?
I think the size of this...
if you're going to give it back anyway, just don't take it. Like, then you don't have to pay government people to send it and process it and all that stuff. Doesn't that make more sense? It does to me.
Well, that's a lot of questions, and I certainly think I mean, let me back up and say why I need this. Because I am on board of the progressives that if you work in America, you should be able to earn a living wage.
What does that mean, a living wage?
A living wage means that you can afford food and housing, that you can actually, I'm sure there's a formal definition that I don't know, but it means that you are, you can afford food, housing, and other minimums of life. You can afford heat in the winter and so forth.
Would a car count with that?
No.
Cell phone?
Uh, Fuck if I know, but phones are cheap.
Like a flip phone,
Yeah, or just just a shitty smartphone. That's not too expensive.
Hmm. I want to quote this. I saw this posted multiple times on social media.
Then
So
it must be true.
Not that, no, I don't think it's true at all, but
Go on.
I feel like it went slightly viral.
Yeah.
I think it was a Reddit post or something, but this person posted, the premise of minimum wage when it was introduced was that a single wage earner should be able to own a home and support a family. That was what it was based on. A full-time job, any job should be able to accomplish this. The fact people scoff at this idea, if presented nowadays as though the people that ring up your groceries or hand you your burgers don't deserve the luxury of a home and a family, is disgusting. And then below this, somebody commented, also, if a livable wage breaks the system, then the system deserves to be broken. What do you think about that?
I think it's a little too optimistic. I'm also enough of a believer in the system that I don't talk about the system wanting to break the system. That's more inflammatory rhetoric than I'm inclined to use. I do think it's a problem that there are people who go hungry in America. I think it's a problem that, to use one of the examples I'm most fond of, 50% of Americans don't have, couldn't produce $400 in cash in case of an emergency. Or they don't have $400 in cash. They could get it, they could borrow it, but they don't have $400 in the bank to draw on. That just, in my mind, too many people live too precariously in America, given how wealthy we are as a nation.
How much of that do you think is people not knowing how to manage money?
I'm sure
And, I, and I'm not good. I'm not great at it either. So I'm not like looking down on people like that. But like, I feel like a lot of humans, like money is just like this. Like a lot of people just don't know how to deal with it or handle it smartly and use it to their benefit. It almost digs them in a deeper hole.
I think you're right. People don't, but I wouldn't go there as a primary explanation because that is placing more blame on the people and less on our system of governance.
See, to me, I feel like the government should get more out of the way as far as income tax goes. If you want 50% of the people to have more money, then stop taking it from their paychecks. I know I've mentioned this in past episodes, but to me, I haven't heard a single argument that doesn't convince me of that.
Because the shit we've decided to spend money on is expensive.
Who's we?
The American people. Programs like Medicare and Social Security have high levels of support.
Yeah, but that ain't shit compared to war and military.
We spend a lot of money on those two things.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It bothers me that there's hardworking Americans who are getting hundreds of dollars taken out of their paychecks every month. Like month to month, it's hundreds of dollars.
Right. I don't
And
think
that would drastically affect their lives. And I don't know. That just doesn't, that's my biggest thing. person who's like, just tax the rich. So
Well, you're going to have to.
I
There's just
suck
not
either,
enough
but
rich to provide enough money. You're going to have to
yeah,
tax the middle class some.
I don't like it. I think just let. I think more responsibility should be on the people than the government.
But
Instead of just handing the government a lot of our money and saying fix it.
yeah.
I just don't like that idea. I'm not an anarchist, but man, I feel like every citizen should have more responsibility of community and what goes on in this country than just, well, they're taking our money, they're supposed to fix it and figure it out.
My problem there is that the rules of capitalism inherently favor capital, inherently privilege business in ways that ordinary workers don't benefit.
But hasn't capital and capitalism built everything that we love and know?
Oh yeah,
Like, that's what laid the groundwork for all this stuff?
certainly. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd always want capitalism, but that doesn't mean it can't be regulated to the public benefit. Every country in the world regulates their capitalism to some extent. There's no libertarian paradise on earth of fully unregulated capitalism.
I would love to see what happens if they did. So I could be proven wrong or right, but at least I would know.
Sure. Go back to about 1890 and you'll see capitalism in the United States that was far less regulated.
Yeah, but also the technology that I feel like it would be a much different like experiment now than then with the technology we have.
Certainly, jobs wouldn't be as dangerous as they were in 1890, but this is a time when people worked often 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Children worked.
Good. Get those freeloaders to work. Just sitting at home playing with blocks. Fucking put those blocks on the railroad.
Companies routinely retained private armies to do their bidding and sometimes murder striking workers.
Well, the striking workers should have had guns.
I don't think you're being serious, Dalton.
Only like 30%.
Yeah. So I don't think the capitalism of the time is what most people want. I think it's evidence that all countries have regulated capitalism compared to the 1890 American libertarian paradise.
I don't know if it was a libertarian paradise because there's still a lot of laws on the books that were very in favor of white people.
That too.
That's not very libertarian.
That too. In any event, I think most people want. Most people, Americans, overwhelmingly want a welfare state. They support Social Security. They support Medicare. They're in support of provisions of the Affordable Care Act, like the pre-existing coverage, like no discrimination against pre-existing coverage, and so forth. And I could go on, but they want government to perform those functions. It didn't go over well when Bush in 2005 proposed privatizing Social Security.
That stuff I'm not too well educated on, so I can't really talk shit on Social Security or Medicare and stuff like that until I read more.
Yes, where the government's spending a lot of money.
But it's coming, trust me.
What's coming?
My argument against it.
Good.
Maybe, I don't know.
Anyhow, would like to see an increased earned income tax credit. Again, this is a widely supported program. Both Democrats and Republicans like it. I think certainly it could be changed in some ways. Orrin Cass, who was Mitt Romney's chief economist in 2012, has made some good arguments about how we would restructure it. It shouldn't be a lump sum once a year. It should be a monthly payment. But I would like to see for very low wage workers, not just getting all their tax money back, but a positive transfer to them from the government.
Got the income tax for people under a certain wage. Just cut to the chase, and they get it every week.
It's that's more than cutting it. It's making it negative. You know who once supported a negative income tax? Libertarian hero Milton Friedman.
Yeah. So the libertarians I listen to, they don't quote him a ton.
I mean, he is dead.
Yeah. The main libertarian I listen to, he's a Ludwig von Mises. Tom Woods is pretty good. He's alive now, but I'm blanking on the other name that the guy references a bunch, but
Hayek? Friedrich
probably.
Hayek? Yeah.
I think
Austrian
so.
Economist.
Yeah, the Austrian economist. Milton Fried was more Chicago.
Yeah, he was at Chicago. He was at the University of Chicago.
Yeah. I haven't looked into it deeply. I haven't read like the original works of Ludwig von Mises, but like the libertarian I listen to the most, that makes the most sense when he talks, is an Austrian economist.
Huh. Wait, it's the Austrian actually talking?
No.
Oh, it's Hayek. Yeah, it's probably Hayek.
But I've done very little reading.
Let me pass on just a couple more thoughts. Not really answers, but thoughts. So in evaluating minimum wage program, whether increasing the minimum wage has affected jobs, there are some complicated issues. Are they increasing wages for existing workers? Is it keeping people who are out of the labor market? Is it keeping more of them out, or is it letting in more of them out? Were people who have given up trying to find a job in frustration because the jobs all pay shit? Will they return? What percentage of the minimum wage labor market is teenagers who just want a summer job and who would likely quit soon versus older people who are actually relying on it to support a family? I think these are all concerns in what the minimum wage, in setting a minimum wage for. So I don't. So how would you sum up your arguments, Dalton?
Well, I guess I have one last question. So is minimum wage just the thing that people are going to constantly have to chase down throughout history? It's always going to constantly have to be raised? Is that like how you think it would go, or how it's going to go?
That's how it has gone, at least until the last couple of decades. It was just raised to track inflation.
Do you think a minimum wage should be a quote unquote?
I didn't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. I didn't. Yeah. Go on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you think a minimum wage should be a quote unquote living wage?
I think that's not feasible. I would like to see a higher minimum wage coupled with an increased federal subsidy, like the earned income tax credit, or for that matter, Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate, has proposed something similar, so that I don't really know exactly what a living wage is, but yes, closer to that level.
Yeah,
Closer to the
and
level.
it would obviously change state and city by city.
Well, I don't think, again, I don't think cities could all be in the business, at least smaller ones, of determining what the optimum wage and subsidy should be. I just think that as the wealthiest country ever, we should not have citizens who are going hungry. There's more economic insecurity in this country than there should be or has to be.
Yeah. Well, then I think we should stop stealing people's money and emphasize charity more.
Again,
Voluntary assistance to our community, our fellow people, from the people.
I've heard that argument. It might work, it might not work.
I think it would. I mean, we see examples of it all the time, stories where, things like GoFundMe, the technology we have,
Yeah.
people see stories of people in need and they get hundreds of thousands of dollars of people donating. We have so many people. If everybody donates $1 here, $1 there, I mean,
A
we could
lot
change
of
tons of people's
GoFundMes,
lives.
a lot of GoFundMes aren't funded. A very large number are for healthcare costs. That's troubling to me. That seems wrong.
Yeah, the healthcare issue. I have no opinion on that because I have no idea what's the proper way to go about that.
That is a tough issue, to quote our
Yeah.
president.
I mean, aren't we the most? I've read that we're the most charitable country in the world.
We
Our
are,
citizens give the most charity. Like,
but one part of that is church tithing, and certainly a fair amount of church tithing goes back to support members who don't have enough food. But
well, that's a good thing, right?
yeah, it's a good thing. But that accounts for a lot of the charity, and that's a little different than just writing a check at the end of the year.
Well, one thing, I love that we have the same goal.
Yeah.
That we don't want hungry people. I love the debate of like the best way to go about it. But I love that, we all have the same goal. We all want good things. So that's why I like talking to you.
Well, we definitely agree there. And on that note, thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, and when we post the episode, comment what you think, maybe articles or videos that express your opinion or you think are interesting. We want to hear your feedback. We want to read what you have to say, so feel free to come on in the discussion.
And I'll actually post a couple of links on the YouTube and the Facebook page to articles on the subject. I don't know if they'll provide a definitive answer, but they will certainly raise some of the issues considering a minimum wage entails.
All right. As long as you post that Peter Schiff and balanced.
I will.
You can put above it. This is what Dalton thinks.
Okay.
The dumb one.
No, you're not the dumb one, for fuck's sake. I'm just older and I've been in
Well-
school longer.
That is true. But the premise of the podcast is I'm an idiot. So I'm going with that so people don't take me seriously.
All right. End the podcast right now so Dalton and I can argue about this. So if you haven't already, go give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you find your podcasts. Thanks, everyone.